we find that Saul once again is chasing after David, even though the Lord is protecting David. And he has 3,000 men with him in verse 2. And David and his men, the ones that were with him, were hiding out in apparently a very large cave there. And they were back in the inner recesses of the cave when Saul decides to go into the cave and apparently take a nap in verse 3. And as he does so, David's men say, look, here's your opportunity to kill Saul. Matter of fact, they say that, behold, this is the day which the Lord said to you, behold, I'm about to give your enemy into your hand. Well, they're saying, God has done this. This is of God. He is, in essence, telling you that this is your opportunity to kill your enemy. So in one moment, while Saul is sleeping, David could have gotten rid of this problem. He could have rescued his own life, gotten rid of Saul, and could have become king all in one moment of time. But he refuses to do that, and what he does do is verse 4, he arose and cut off a piece of the robe of Saul's robe. Apparently, Saul had laid his robe aside somewhere. David went over, cut a piece off that robe, and went back hiding in the cave. But even that, verse 5, bothered his conscience. The tender conscience of this man at times amazes us. It's part of his heart, the heart that God says is like his own heart. And so it bothered him that he had even done that to the Lord's anointed, Saul. And so in verse 7, David persuaded his men not to kill him, and Saul left the cave. Now, after he was out of the cave and on the other side, it would appear that David is on one mountain range here with his men. On another mountain range is Saul and his men. So there's a valley in between them. So it's pretty safe for David to come out now and to holler across the ridge. Apparently they were close enough they could hear one another. And David showed Saul his piece of the robe that he cut off. And the reason he does that is he wants Saul to see that he could have killed him, and he didn't, and that he has no reason to be afraid of David. He says, look, I'm not against you. And I in verse 12, he says, may the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. I am not trying to kill you. And he says in verse 9, why do you listen to the words of men? So apparently men like Doeg that we've run into before, and others are inciting Saul to go out there and try to get David. They were on Saul's team there, and they were lying about David. They were claiming David was inciting some kind of a conspiracy, that he wanted to take over the kingdom. But David has just demonstrated that he could have killed Saul in an instant, and Saul could have done nothing about it, and he didn't. So that's pretty good proof that David is not trying to take the life of Saul or take over his kingdom. Well, when that happened in verse 16, we have at least a reprieve for a time in the heart of Saul. He says, verse 16, is this your voice, my son David? Then Saul lifted up his voice and wept. So apparently they were far enough apart there wasn't just a perfect identification. And so but he does recognize David's voice. Apparently he can see the piece of the robe that David had cut off. And he said to David, you're more righteous than I. So he now sees that David is not out to get him, and that David is a man who is a better man than himself. And that's really something for him to say something like that. And we find in verse 16 that he even weeps. For this brief moment anyway, his heart was broken with his perhaps his own sinfulness, perhaps his desire to kill David when he knows he shouldn't. But whatever, his heart is broken, and for a little bit, he realizes he's wrong. And in verse 30, he says, now behold, I know that you will surely be king. Now Jonathan had told David that back in the last chapter. Saul knew this. Saul knew Samuel had anointed him. God had appointed him, and Saul knew that. And now he says, I know that you will surely be king. So he asks one favor of David. Now he's not going to quit chasing David, but at this moment he has a weak moment. And he says, verse 21, so now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants after me, that you will not destroy my name from my father's household. And David swore to Saul and then went home. So Saul knows he's going to die, and he's asking David not to wipe out his whole family. Now, in ancient times, when a new king came to power, in most countries, a lot of times in Israel as well, they wiped out all the potential rivals. They killed the whole family of the preceding king. That's very common, happened all the time. So Saul asked David not to do that. David said he would not. Now later on, when we come to 2 Samuel chapter 9, we find that David is as good as his word. He had a hard time finding any of the descendants of Saul because so many of them had been killed in battle. But he did find a little son of Jonathan named Mephibosheth. We'll see him later. And he brings this young man into his home, and he protects him and takes care of him as if he were his own son. David is as good as his word to Saul.